Water is a very complicated issue. It's a critical resource for everything we care about. Iran is in that situation right now. Their reservoirs are very low. There's very little water available. Their groundwater is overpumped. There are billions of people today who still don't have access to safe water and sanitation. Among the most significant impacts will be impacts on the hydrologic cycle, changes in temperature, changes in rainfall patterns, changes in extreme events, changes in ice conditions on the planet. All these things are already happening because we have failed. The UN they've set the goal, the target of providing safe water and sanitation for everyone on the planet by the year 2030.
Which is not
We're,
happening, right?
we're not going to meet that
Yeah.
goal. By adaptation, it means we have to adapt to those changes and how those changes are going to affect us. And what we don't mitigate and what we don't adapt, we suffer. The government is hiding science and misrepresenting science and cutting science rather than choosing to act on what we know. We know that the fossil fuel industry has funded climate deniers for decades. That's that's not a claim, that's a fact. If we can educate people and policymakers about what water problems are and what the challenges are and what the solutions are, we'll move in the right direction.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Science Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Mohammed Ittifaq. Today, we are going to talk about climate change and water. I'm talking to somebody who said almost 15 years ago that we are now managing our relationship with water very well. If someone were to ask you today, how's your relationship with water? Many people might respond like, who? Water? Maybe simply would say, I have never really thought about it. So globally, many surveys show us that people do care about water. And when it comes to what would they change in their behavior to conserve water, that's a more complicated question. But today, we will try to understand what needs to change in our daily lives and maybe how to conserve water more. And do we really need to? And is it really a complicated question? So today we're going to talk about water and how our changing climate is reshaping water availability, access, and equality. We all know around the world there are countries whose economies are still primarily agriculture-based, not fully industrialized. But whether an economy is agricultural or industrial, both are highly vulnerable when it comes to water systems, and many countries which are water-stressed countries. So right now, maybe you have been seeing headlines about Iran, once again making into the international headlines, not for politics or conflict, but because of water. So without further ado, allow me to introduce my guest today. Dr. Peter Gleick is a leading scientist, innovator, and communicator on water and climate change. He's a co-founded the Pacific Institute in Oakland, California in 1987, one of the most innovative, independent, non-governmental research centers, creating and advancing solutions to the world's most pressing water challenges. He is currently President-emeritus and Senior Fellow at the Institute. Dr. Gleick is a scientist trained at the intersection of hydrology, climatology, and policy. Dr. Peter, welcome to Science Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So my first question, are you following what is going on in Iran?
Oh, yes. I try to follow almost anything related to water. As you said in your introduction, water is a very complicated issue. It's a critical resource for everything we care about, for everything we do. And my work on water is extended over many decades on access to safe water and sanitation, the human right to water, water and climate. I've done a lot of work as a hydroclimatologist on climate change and water, water and conflict. And ultimately, we have serious global challenges around water, but ultimately all of these challenges are local in a way. So I do try to keep up on what's happening around the world, and certainly what's happening right now in Iran is a very good example of some of the challenges other parts of the world are facing and other parts of the world can expect to face in the future.
So in many of your videos and the lectures, you have said that we still have that much water what we had 4 billion years ago. What went wrong in Iran's case? If we look at the hydrology cycle, the evaporation, all that stuff, how did they get into this situation? And a lot of people saying it's climate change. Some people saying it's more of a mismanagement of water resources. How do you see the situation?
Well, of course, in a way, we live on a water planet. There's plenty of water here. 97% of that water is salt water. It's too salty to drink, too salty to use to grow crops, the water in the oceans. And of the little bit of fresh water that's available, probably its most important characteristic is that it's very unevenly distributed in space and time. Some places on the planet are very wet, some are very dry. We have wet seasons and we have dry seasons. And because of the way the climate works, there's enormous variability over time. There are periods of drought, there are periods of floods. What's happening in Iran, for those who aren't following, is very, very extreme, persistent drought. Natural droughts occur naturally, although I would argue that increasingly what we're seeing are droughts that are influenced, worsened by human-caused climate change, which we also know is happening. But as you hinted, I think this is not just purely a hydrological challenge. This is an economic challenge and a political challenge and a management challenge. Iran today has a population that's probably 8 to 10 times larger than it was many decades ago, with the same amount of basic water resources. They've expanded their industrial base, they've expanded their agricultural base. All of those things demand more and more water. And as populations grow, as economies grow, the demand for water typically has grown. And Iran, which is naturally a relatively dry country,
Yes.
has reached its limits, I would argue, what I call peak water,
Mhm.
its limits of water availability, given the way they're currently using water and given the way the natural hydrologic cycle, influenced by climate change, is giving them the water that's available. It's a combination of all of those factors.
Yeah, and you also, at a great length, you have talked previously about how these situations can lead to conflicts. Um, and it was interesting to me or fascinating that the regime over there is still very much talking about we don't want any unrest or civil war or anything like that. But they ignored last 60 years or 6 year consecutive drought in the country. They ignored all the scientific warnings, and now all they're worried about is the regime change. So how do you see situations like that? And is it like really a warning sign for that particular region, which is a dry in general, that to see that might go into other countries seeing and also can lead to more deadly conflicts?
Well, yes, we've worked at the Pacific Institute for many, many years on the issue of water and conflict. I run the program there. We maintain something called the Water Conflict Chronology, which is an open source database, the best open source database on violence associated with water. And it goes back 4,500 years. The events in the database go back to ancient history, interestingly enough, also in often events that have occurred in the Middle East region. And we look at water conflicts in three categories. Water as a trigger of conflict, which is sort of what we've mostly been talking about so far. That is, conflicts over access to water, over control of water resources, over limited water and scarcity. But we also look at water as a casualty or a weapon of conflict, and conflicts that start for other reasons. Wars like the Russia-Ukraine war, where water systems have been, civilian water systems have been attacked during conflicts that start for political or economic or geographical reasons. And in Iran, not unlike many other places, water is a hydrologic issue, but it's a political and economic issue. It has to do with how water systems are built and how water management is done, and whether people have a say in their access to water or control of water, or whether there are conflicts between rural areas and urban areas. As cities grow, they take more and more water from the countryside. And Iran, that's been a problem. Farmers have been arguing that their water resources, historical water resources, have been taken away from them to provide water for growing cities, something that's happening in countries all over the world. And if countries don't pay attention to this, if they don't pay attention to more sustainably managing the water resources they have, if they don't pay attention to ensuring that everyone has access to basic water services and that water is well distributed, they run the risk of political dislocation and political upset and riots and violence. And we're seeing some of that in Iran, but we see it in other countries as well.
And now they're thinking they might need to relocate, from 15 to 17 million people and change the capital. Do you think they're going to reach the day zero? Is that what the term used to be? Like, when the taps run dry out of water or something?
Yeah, the term day zero came about a few years ago when Cape Town, South Africa, was experiencing an extreme severe drought, like many other parts of the world, but where their water system basically was literally days away from running out, where they would be unable any longer to provide water for their piped water system. The reservoirs were running dry, the groundwater was being overpumped. Uh, Cape Town avoided a day zero scenario through implementing a wide range of very increasingly aggressive conservation and efficiency efforts and cutting back water for certain parts of the day. And then the rains came. And so there's been a lot of discussion about other cities and other countries reaching day zero scenarios where their water resources run out. And Iran is in that situation right now. Their reservoirs are very low. There's very little water available. Their groundwater is overpumped. They have talked about moving Tehran, the
Mhm.
capital.
Yes,
Uh, I think that's it's unlikely to happen. It's extremely difficult to move a
yes,
large city,
absolutely.
but it's an indication of how serious the problem is and how serious some of the actions they're going to have to take if the drought doesn't ameliorate.
Absolutely. And I think I saw a news as well, like they're gonna do some cloud seeding, something like that. And I think recently, last year or year before, there was another video circulating on social media, like maybe Dubai did it, and it like flooded many parts, and then people saying like, I don't know, it was like real video or fake video. These days AI, it's tough to deal. But like, can they do that? And also, do you think it's likelihood that they can avoid day zero in Iran?
Well, so first on cloud seeding. Cloud seeding is the idea that we can artificially increase rainfall by introducing very, very small particles into clouds that
Mhm.
might otherwise not rain. And those clouds cause some more rain to occur than would otherwise have occurred. Cloud seeding is done in certain parts of the world. There's controversy over whether it actually works. If it works a little bit, not very much.
Mhm.
You have to have clouds, first of all, that might produce rain if you're going to seed them. There's a little bit of political controversy around it because, of course, if you seed a cloud here and it rains, that cloud is not going to provide rain somewhere else where it might have rained. But cloud seeding is I think it's unlikely to have much of an effect anywhere. It's expensive. It's not been really proven to have much of an effect. There are other things that could be done and that need to be done to change the way we use water, to change our demand on limited ecosystems, to respond to severe extreme events like droughts. It's not clear that the government in Iran has taken all of the measures that they ought to take in the kinds of severe situations they find themselves. But there is more that could be done.
Yeah, absolutely. 15 years ago, you said that we are in a water crisis. How would you describe today's situation and what has changed and what hasn't changed over the last 15 years?
Well, so there are lots of pieces to the water crisis. I do believe we're in a series of crises, if you will. I wrote a book about this called The Three Ages of Water
Yes.
last year,
Mhm.
and I describe some of the different components of that. We've talked already a little bit about climate change and severe drought. We know that humans are changing the climate. We know that among the most significant impacts will be impacts on the hydrologic cycle, changes in temperature, changes in rainfall patterns, changes in extreme events, changes in ice conditions on the planet. All these things are already happening because we have failed to slow the rate and ultimately stop the rate of human caused climate change. And that's a big challenge. But perhaps the most serious piece of the global water crisis, in my opinion, is the failure to provide safe water and sanitation to everyone on the planet. There are billions of people today who still don't have access to safe water and sanitation, something those of us in the richer countries of the world take for granted, and something, frankly, everyone ought to be able to take for granted.
Mhm.
But it's not true. We know how to provide safe water and sanitation for everyone. The amount of money required isn't very large
Mhm.
compared to what we spend on a lot of other things. And yet, That still hasn't happened. And the failure to provide basic water services for everyone leads to bad things. It leads to conflict over water.
Yes.
It leads to water-related diseases. It leads to women and girls having to work long hours to collect often unsafe water rather than go to school and contribute to the economy. There are a lot of bad things that happen with that failure. But we also have ecological problems associated with our water use. We're destroying natural aquatic ecosystems. We're having trouble growing enough food for the world's population. Again, as you suggested in your introduction, a lot of the water that humans use goes to agriculture. Typically, about 80% of total water withdrawals goes to grow the food required for our 8+ billion people. And a lot of that water comes from groundwater systems that are not sustainably managed, that are overpumped, and groundwater levels are dropping.
Yes.
It's becoming more difficult and expensive to pump that water, and that's in the long run unsustainable. That's another piece of this global water problem.
So if it's not that it doesn't require that much money and we have sufficient water, we can, put more clean water, and that would reduce the burden on health systems too, because there are a lot of diseases and conflicts, right? Why are we not doing it? Why these countries are like so bad in shape because of poorly mismanagement? Why are we doing it? Because
I
we
would
know
argue,
like water is the most basic necessity we need every day, all day for many different things.
I ask myself that question every day. The answer's sort of complicated, but to make it simple, it's governments have failed to meet their responsibilities for their people.
Mm.
As you say, it doesn't get much more basic than safe water and sanitation.
Yeah.
But governments have a lot of, especially developing countries where governments are weak or incompetent or corrupt.
Mhm.
Governments have a lot of things they have to deal with. They have to deal with water and sanitation and education and communications and transportation and economic factors. And they've just failed to make the commitment
Mm.
to provide the water required for their people. Now, sometimes there are hydrologic challenges, sometimes there are technological challenges. None of those challenges can't be overcome. All of those challenges could be solved if governments were to make the commitment.
Mm.
The UN has put in place something called the Sustainable Development Goals, a whole
Yeah.
series of priorities for 2030. One of those, this SDG 6, is the water one.
Mm.
They've set the goal, the target of providing safe water and sanitation for everyone on the planet by the year 2030.
Which is not happening,
We're,
right?
we're not going to meet that
Yeah.
goal, not by 2030. But I do believe ultimately, I absolutely believe that ultimately we can. I don't know when, not in my lifetime, I would imagine, but ultimately we will. It just should happen much faster.
Yeah, absolutely. So what aspect of water are you mostly worried about? Because these days there's a lot of discussion on microplastics and plastic, and water, bottled water, and you have talked about that too in your previous talks. But like what aspect of water are you mostly concerned with?
Yes, I wrote a book about bottled water about a decade ago called Bottled and Sold, the story behind our obsession with bottled water that talks about that
Mhm.
story. Because I work on water so broadly,
Yes,
it's hard for me to pick any one problem.
problem or concern.
I've worked on water and sanitation, and I've worked on the human right to water. I've worked on water and climate, and I work on water and conflict. And all of those problems are important and critical, and they're all part and parcel of the water story in general. And, I believe there are solutions to all of those problems, but I think people need to be more aware of, most of us take water for granted. Again, you said this in your introduction. Most of us don't think much about
Yeah.
water because we're fortunate enough to
Yes.
live in places where you get up in the morning and you turn on the tap and clean, safe water comes out, and you can flush your wastes away, and you can cook and clean with safe water, and we don't think about it much.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that's not true, as we've talked about, for much of the planet, and that is a serious problem.
And
But
there's sorry, go ahead.
no, that's okay. I guess the argument is that solving water problems would solve so many other problems
Yes.
that we ought to pay much more attention to them.
Mhm.
And solving basic access to safe water and sanitation frees up girls and women to go to school and participate in the economy and cuts health costs. Reducing conflicts over water
Yeah.
reduces violence associated with all sorts of natural resource issues. Dealing with the issue of climate change will make problems associated with water less severe,
Yeah.
as, as well as all sorts of other climate related problems. These things are all interconnected.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit about climate change. But before I ask you that question, another question, there's a new thing in town now, and that is AI data centers. And they consume a lot of water, right? And there's a lot of information or misconceptions about them. I'm based in Massachusetts right now, but like my home state is Virginia. And Northern Virginia is building crazy amount of, hundreds of data centers. Like, where do we stand? Is it true people are genuinely concerned? Is it a legitimate concern? How we see the water consumption of these AI data centers and what the new form of, water consumption, which we haven't seen before at that scale, maybe.
Yeah, so the generic issue is that we're very bad at thinking about the consequences of some of the economic decisions we make.
Hmm.
AI centers is just sort of the latest example where we know they're energy intensive, we know that they're water intensive,
Yes.
and yet we've started to build them for economic reasons, driven by the the Silicon Valley
Tech growth.
AI industry,
Mhm.
without any consideration of the energy and water costs
Mhm.
of those systems. The assumption has been, well, we need these things, we'll build them, and we'll figure out where the energy and the water is going to come from. We do that for a lot of different things, and AI centers is probably just the latest example. But it's a good example of the need to do things differently from a planning point of view. We need to think about the water implications and the other resource implications of decisions we make about our economies,
Mhm.
the kinds of crops we grow and where we grow them, the kinds of irrigation systems we use, the kinds of industrial infrastructure we build. Those all have resource costs, water among them, and we need to be better about planning more carefully and building those things in the right places and building them in the right way. So, for example, we can build AI centers that use a lot less water than they're using today.
Mhm.
But we build them the way we're building them because we don't care. Those people don't care about the water costs because water is cheap. They think they can manipulate the local hydrology and talk talk the local governments into providing the water they need
Yeah.
as a cost of doing business. And it shouldn't be a cost of doing business that's not that's paid for by the local communities without their participation. We could change the way we do those things.
Absolutely. And I think several years ago or recently, you said that we can look at the water problem as a climate problem, like, mitigation, adaptation. How would you describe, like, how should we deal with the water? Is it a mode of mitigation, adaptation, restore, repair, or like we just suffer it along, like, as it is going?
Well, it's all of the above. Obviously, by mitigate, the idea is we have to reduce the impacts of what we do on the water cycle. By adaptation, it means we have to adapt to those changes and how those changes are going to affect us. And what we don't mitigate and what we don't adapt, we suffer.
Mhm.
It would be great to do less suffering
Yeah.
and to do more mitigation, more adaptation. This is absolutely the same thing for the climate system. There are a lot of things that we can do to reduce the consequences of human use of water on the hydrologic system and on the environment and on other communities. There are a lot of things that we need to be doing to adapt to those impacts we can no longer avoid
Mm.
to make ourselves less vulnerable. And at the moment, we're doing too much suffering.
And I want to talk a little bit about climate change. A few questions. What are some common misconceptions about the impacts of climate change on water?
Uh, Misconceptions.
Yes, like does it change the way we get water, or like how exactly it changes, or like how people maybe, sometime do not understand that climate change or the changing environment, how we are polluting this environment and is going to change our water systems or how we get water or access to clean water.
Yeah, I would say the problem is more that most people just don't understand what the implications of climate change are for water resources or anything else, frankly, rather than misconceptions.
Mhm.
As I said earlier, the hydrologic cycle is the climate cycle.
Mhm.
Evaporation, the formation of clouds, condensation, precipitation, runoff back to the oceans, evaporation again. That's the hydrologic cycle, and it's fundamentally the climate cycle.
Mhm.
We know that we're changing the climate, to reiterate what I said earlier. We know, we in the science community know, that some of the worst impacts will be on water resources, and we're trying to communicate that message,
Mhm.
like we are today, to
Mhm.
the general public, that among the most severe impacts of climate change will be on water availability and water quality and extreme events. For example, a 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature, which we've already seen
Yes.
worldwide, and
Mhm.
it's continuing to get hotter and hotter.
Mhm.
But a 1 degree increase in temperature adds about 7% more water into the atmosphere because of evaporation. Temperatures go up, we get more evaporation. More evaporation, more water in the atmosphere. That water has to go somewhere.
Mhm.
It will ultimately come down as rainfall.
Mhm.
So globally, there's going to be more rainfall. But we don't really care globally what happens. What we care about is what's
Yes.
happening locally, where we
Yes.
are. And
Proximity.
the
Yes.
bad news, maybe this is a misconception, the bad news is that an increase in rainfall isn't necessarily a good thing.
No, it's not.
It would be a good thing if it happened where it was dry.
Yes, like
If it
right now
rained
in Iran.
more,
Right now
if
in
it
Iran.
rained more in Iran.
Yes. Yes.
But the models are telling us, and now observation is telling us, that the wet areas in the world are getting wetter
Mhm.
and floods are more severe. And the dry areas of the world, unfortunately, are getting drier,
Mhm.
which is the opposite of what we would hope would happen. And more of what's falling as rain is happening in short, extreme events
Yes.
rather than a general, gentle increase in rainfall. So those are not what we would want to happen if we had any choice. And yet those are some of the consequences of climate change.
And that's exactly what happens in Pakistan. That's my home country, where I'm originally from. And they see like within a few hours, it rained so much. Within last 6 months, it didn't rain, and all of a sudden, it like cloud bursting. They got like cloud bursting, and all of a sudden, it rained and it flooded everywhere. They
Right.
couldn't store the water. They couldn't do anything. And then people were saying, "Oh, we should be developing, we should be building more dams." And now, like Iran has developed, built 600 dams, and they're still dry. 7 years ago, you said you like to be. I'm just going on the timeline. It's weird, but I just took my notes. What you have said in the past. So 7 years ago, you said you like to be an optimist. Uh, and if you see the overall picture of the world today in terms of climate change and the disasters and flooding and catastrophes we're looking at and the water, are you still like kind of very hopeful person that we're not going to see 23 degrees Celsius by 2100 or earlier or something like that, and we can still do something about it?
It is arguably harder and harder to be an optimist these days for a lot of different reasons. I guess I would describe myself as a long-term optimist. I believe that we can solve these problems, uh, and that we will in the long run. And again, I wrote this book, The Three Ages of Water, and my third age is a positive vision for the future in which we've solved the problems that we face today. It's harder to be an optimist in the short run.
Mm.
There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of intentional ignorance.
Mm.
There are increasing assaults on science, certainly in this country.
Yes.
The government is hiding science and misrepresenting science and cutting science rather than choosing to act on what we know. They're putting their heads in the sand.
Mm.
We know how to solve basic access to water and sanitation, as I've argued for billions of people, but in the short run, we haven't done it, and it's going to take decades until we do. We know that climate change is getting worse, not better. I don't think we're going to avoid 3 degrees. We're arguing now, we set the target of 1.5 degrees as a limit, and we're exceeding that this year or in the next year.
Yes.
So we'll set a new target. Well, maybe we can limit climate change to 2 degrees. And we're going to burn through those targets unless the world gets more serious about reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases. And we'll see more impacts of climate change that we're going to have to figure out how to adapt our systems to make more resilient to those impacts we can no longer avoid. We're seeing increases in conflicts over water. the database that we manage, added 420 new events last year, a record number of
Wow.
conflicts over water last year, and it's increasing over time. So in the short run, things are getting worse. The reason I'm an optimist in the long run is because we know how to solve these problems.
Mhm.
I see success stories all around me of people growing more food with less water, or cities and industries improving the efficiency of water use and doing more with less water.
Mhm.
I know that there are ways to meet basic human needs for water. I know that there are ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Even in the water sector, it takes a lot of energy to provide our water, but we can do it with less energy. There are solutions out there, and we just have to implement them.
Absolutely. And in many of the conversations, because you're the person who just doesn't look at the water, but like you also look at the climate. And I haven't seen you talking much about the fossil fuel industry. Uh, so do you think that we can put a lot of blame on them too for lobbying and polluting the environment and rivers and the oceans and everything? And they burn too much fossil fuel, they lobby for it, and they continue lobbying for it. And to what extent do you think, like, it's like just because our politicians are making a lot of decisions a lot of times because of the influence of those lobbyists?
Well, so
So
of course
hmm,
that's a political question, and I'm a scientist, but there's plenty of blame to go around here.
mhm,
The fossil fuel industry, of course, has one main objective, and that is to sell fossil fuels.
mhm,
And any political argument that we need to cut fossil fuel emissions in order to reduce the severity of climate change is met by the fossil fuel industry with opposition because that's their industry. They
mhm,
want to sell fossil fuels.
yeah,
And politicians, of course, are vulnerable to political and economic arguments and to corruption over time. Uh,
and
we know
election.
that the we know that the fossil fuel industry has funded climate deniers for decades.
Mhm,
That's that's not a claim. That's a
yeah,
fact. That's well known. And it's in their interest to keep selling fossil fuels to us. Interestingly, the fact that renewable energy systems, solar, wind, hydrogeothermal, are increasingly cost effective
yes,
means that we're slowly, too slowly, but we're beginning to move away from fossil fuels, and that
it's a good
threatens
thing.
the very powerful fossil fuel industry. They continue to try and slow action on climate change, but in the long run, the fossil fuel industry is dead. We need to leave fossil fuels in the ground, and they'll fight that as long as possible, but that's the reality.
That would be my tagline. Fossil fuel industry is dead. So if you have the power to change one thing about water, what would be?
Maybe it's to educate everyone about the importance of water,
Mm,
the challenges that we face around water, and the solutions that are available.
mm,
The more people know,
mm,
the more they're likely to act.
absolutely.
The more they know about their options for acting,
Mm,
the more likely they are to act on the right things. And ultimately, people really care about water. If you look at public opinion
yes.
polls about the environment, the water is the most important thing to people. It's always been the most important thing. And if we can educate people and policymakers about what water problems are and what the challenges are and what the solutions are, we'll move in the right direction.
And my last question is, and you can take 19 seconds to think, what is something which is still missing from our conversations and we still need to talk more about water?
Well, I could talk about water forever, as perhaps you can tell. I love the subject. It's important to me. It's important to everyone.
Yes, it is.
I just think I'm not sure. I'm sure there are lots of issues that we could cover in much more detail if we had a lot more time. But I would just encourage listeners to pay more attention to water, to go to their local water hearings and water boards, to run for their water agencies, to vote for politicians who care about water, to use water more efficiently, to know that they could do the things they want with less water and it'll save them money over time, and to look at those options. Because the more we know, the more we'll do the right thing.
Absolutely. With that, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Dr. Peter Gleick, once again coming on the show.